As a grief coach and a grief researcher, I often get asked how I picked this as my career choice. And I often share this story in response. Imagine dreaming of all of the amazing girls' trips you had planned with your best friend. Picture the vibrant, sun-kissed beaches of the Caribbean, each one a destination on your bucket list. You chat endlessly about the thrilling ocean adventures you'd embark on, the beautiful sunsets you'd watch together, and the laughter you'd share. Each milestone birthday was destined to be a grand event, a larger-than-life event that would create unforgettable memories. These dreams, these plans, were more than just vacations. They were the promises of shared experiences and deepened bonds. For my best friend, the milestone birthday we were eagerly anticipating was her 60th, an event destined to be grand, filled with lights, cameras, and action. We were so excited, already planning the festivities and even starting a birthday celebration fund. But then, a meteor crashed into our world. My best friend, my mother, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. All of the plans, celebrations, trips, and memories yet to come came to a screeching halt when we received the devastating news that she had 6 short months left to live. My best friend died at the age of 54. The hopes of the 60th birthday celebration, the trips around the Caribbean, the memories and the good times were all gone. And I immediately became intimately connected to grief. I often say that I wear my grief like a cloak, and the shades of its fabric vary based on where I am in my grief journey. Some days, my grief is colored red with rage, as I am furious at her life being cut short. On other days, it's a somber black, engulfing me in the darkness of loss and sorrow. And sometimes, it's a softer yellow, a bittersweet hue, as I remember the love and joy we've shared. One thing I've come to understand about grief is that when we are grieving, we may feel a full spectrum of emotions, much like the ever-changing colors of the cloak. So as a grief coach and a grief researcher, I have witnessed firsthand the various ways grief manifests in our lives. There is a profound opportunity to broaden our understanding on grief. And while my initial, deeply personal entry point to understanding grief came from the loss of my mom, grief encompasses far more than the loss of a loved one. There is the opportunity to broaden our perspectives on grief and begin to figure out ways to navigate its presence through the various forms it takes. Grief is defined as the natural and universal human and emotional reaction we have when someone or something of personal significance is lost. The thing about grief is that it can manifest in many forms, especially non-death losses. Grief is present when the steep sadness settles in the first Monday you're at home after you were let go from your job. There are no words to fully capture the experience of pouring years of your blood, your sweat, and your tears into your professional role, only to have your time cut short and your professional connections and networks gone when your organization decides to terminate you. Grief is there to meet you when that circle of friends you were tight with in high school, with all of the adventures and endless memories, ceases to be no more. When the reality settles in that you've grown apart once you went to college, the support has been subpar, and too many boundaries have been crossed. The grief settles in when those friendships have ended and are now buried 6 feet under. Grief is there to meet you when that partnership that led to marriage has now ended in divorce. What do you do with the unactualized dreams that will never come forth? How do you handle grieving a person who is still alive, but internally you feel like you are walking through the hellscape of death? Grief is there to meet you when your beloved cat passes on and you are left with a deep void in your heart. I thought cats had 9 lives. Well, as the circle of life teaches us, that is not true, and we have to grapple with how we move forward. You see, grief is a part of our everyday experiences. Whether it's the end of a relationship, the loss of a job, or the disruption of our daily routines, grief is a constant, though often unacknowledged companion. Our lives are colored with grief. In fact, as I'm mentioning these examples, you might identify with wearing the same grief-colored glasses that I do daily. And nothing gives us more 20/20 vision and perspective than grief does. So, with grief being such a huge part of our lives, why don't we talk about it? Why is it that often talking about grief is seen as taboo, shrouded in silence and mystery? Today, I want to invite us to expand how we conceptualize grief and to begin embracing grief-conscious communication. This type of communication is not only healing, but essential for us to fully engage in the richness of our human experiences. Grief-conscious communication is more than just talking to someone about grief. It's a mindful approach to discussing and responding to grief. Because let's face it, grief doesn't come with an expiration date. You don't just wake up one morning and think, it's been exactly 3 months. I guess I'm officially over it. No. When we experience loss, we are forever changed. Grief is not like that one trendy diet your girlfriend keeps telling you about. It doesn't just fade away after a few weeks. There is no set end date to the emotional responses that may resurface from time to time. So what does it look like to make room for grief-conscious communication? It's about approaching those who are grieving with an empathetic ear, withholding judgment, and taking intentional action, and not saying things like, hey, they're in a better place, or your next job will be amazing. When we ask, are you okay, grief-conscious communicators know that we might be met with silence, or even that awkward, I'm fine, which means that you're anything but fine. That's perfectly okay. Embrace the awkwardness as part of the process. Sometimes there are truly no words to capture the pain of our grief. We must increase our capacity to understand that there are moments where human language fails to describe these profound experiences. In the fast-paced world we live in, grief-conscious communication invites us to slow down and take our time to truly check in on each other. Research shows that expressing grief-related emotions through conversation can significantly improve our physical and mental health. I vividly remember, after losing my mom, having this overwhelming need to talk about her to anyone who was willing to listen. While everyone had gone back to their everyday lives and their busy routines, I found myself stuck in a fog, disoriented, and heavy with grief. I'll never forget those early days back at work when a few colleagues pulled me aside to ask how I was truly doing. They provided a space where I felt comfortable enough to share with them that I wasn't faring well at all. They listened without judgment, offering compassion and their full attention. It was in that moment that I realized how powerful it is to be seen and heard in your grief. Now, I get it. You might cringe at the idea of sharing your grief with a coworker. The workplace may not feel as a safe place for you to be able to have those types of vulnerable conversations, and that's perfectly okay. But my challenge to us all today is this: what does it look like to engage in meaningful conversations with those who are walking through some of the most difficult times in their lives? How do we begin to break down the walls of taboo surrounding grief and instead start embracing communication that shows care and compassion? I want to implore us to think about our current bereavement policies and practices. Currently, here in the United States, there is no federal bereavement leave policy. In fact, most bereavement leave is left up to the individual employer or state. What becomes a challenge, however, is our limited definitions of grief and our personal interpretations on how much time should be allotted for certain types of loss. What happens if you miscarry your unborn child? How much time should you be given? What happens when your aunt, who was like your second mom, passes away and you are unable to cope with the shock of her loss? How much time should you be given when your pet Yorkie, a beloved family member, passes on and you are now dealing with your grief? The thing with current policies is that it leaves room for your individual employer or state to determine who is worthy of being grieved and for how long. What if we reimagine bereavement by embracing grief-conscious communication? Imagine having a conversation with someone who experienced a recent loss to understand what they truly need, rather than passing down a generic 3-day leave policy, maybe with a little sprinkle of FMLA. What if you had a conversation, whether it's time, support, or specific resources? What would it look like if we began to design policies to truly support each other during our times of deepest loss? Consider our current practices, especially around diverse cultures, and how that shapes and informs how we bury and mourn our loved ones. In most cultures, including my own Nigerian heritage, grieving is not just a single-day event. When my mom passed away, we had a 2-day celebration of her life, a process that took weeks to plan. It was no small feat, and during that time, I experienced the profound impact of grief-conscious communication. When colleagues approached me about what types of support I needed, I told them what I needed, but they took over things I couldn't manage in real time. Communicating with collaborators on projects I was on, stepping in to cover my responsibilities, all with a quiet understanding that spoke volumes. They didn't try to force me to talk about my pain or even offer hollow reassurances. They were instrumental in helping me navigate the rhythm of my grief and finding a new pattern to my drum. What would it look like if we began to think about ways that we can begin to incorporate grief-conscious communication in our daily lives? Perhaps this would transform how we engage in these conversations around bereavement. What if instead of applying these rigid timelines, we began to honor the diverse ways we each grieve? By doing so, we could transform not only the workplace, but also how we collectively hold space for each other during times of loss. Perhaps today, you are feeling the call to become a grief-conscious communicator. Maybe you're witnessing someone near you who has walked through the seasons of loss, and you're unsure of how to engage. Well, I want to offer you some ideas to help guide you today. Imagine you're taking a walk in the park, and as you walk, you begin to see the faces of people who've played key roles in your life. Maybe it's your favorite high school teacher, or your hilarious cousin who's always the life of the party. Or maybe it's your best friend with whom you've shared countless adventures. As you walk, memories flood in, some of joy and laughter, others tinged with sadness. Perhaps your best friend experienced the tragic loss of a parent. Or maybe your favorite teacher lost their child. Maybe you witnessed your parent walk through the hardship of losing their job. In those moments, you may have found yourself at a loss for words, unsure of how to comfort them, afraid of saying the wrong thing. We've all been there. I get it. Standing in front of someone we care about deeply, feeling helpless in the face of their grief. But what I want to leave you with today is this. Grief-conscious communication isn't about finding the right words or fixing someone's pain. It's about acknowledging that grief doesn't come with a neat, tidy resolution. Every person's journey is unique. Our role is to create space for authentic expression, whether that takes the form of silence, tears, or words that stumble under the weight of deep emotion. It's about being present, offering compassion, and understanding that grief is messy, nonlinear, and deeply personal. Grief-conscious communication simply asks us to be there, holding space with care, even when we don't have all the answers. Grief-conscious communication is a vital step in shaping a world where talking about grief is no longer seen as taboo. Perhaps today, as you're thinking about this, you're wondering how to move forward. As we begin to embrace grief-conscious communication, we have to be brave enough to wear our own grief openly and transparently with all of the colors and emotions it brings. Today, as I stand before you, the shade of my cloak is a rich, dark purple, symbolizing love and honor. This month would have marked the 60th birthday celebration of my best friend, my mom. While there won't be an elaborate party with delicious birthday cake, the laughter of family or friends, I find solace in keeping her memory alive. Let us be brave enough to wear our grief with the vibrancy of the shades of grief that we bear. May we each demonstrate that the only way to truly embrace grief is to wear it openly and transparently, illuminating the pathway forward, not just for ourselves, but for our communities and those that we love and serve. Thank you.